to introduce Mike Mullane. He's going to be our guest speaker tonight. I will keep my introduction brief because he's going to tell you a little bit about himself also during his lecture. Mike is a former NASA astronaut. He's been to space 3 times. That's pretty impressive. And he is going to give us a presentation on general space interest. And I also would like to thank all of you guys for coming out here today. I know that there was a debate on tonight. I know you guys probably didn't park as close as you normally would have, so we appreciate you guys coming. I also want to thank our sponsor, TechSource. They funded the lecture series for this entire season, so thank you, TechSource, and also Gene at PAC-8. Thank you for always filming our lectures and posting them on YouTube for us. So without any further ado, Mike.
Thank you, Mackenzie. What debate is going on tonight? There's a debate somewhere? I didn't hear about that. Well, thanks. I didn't expect to see many people here tonight with that presidential debate going on, but it's great that you turned out, and I'm looking forward to sharing some stories with you. Thank you for the welcome, by the way. And I have a mix of information in here. Some of it's going to be fun, some of it's going to be interesting, some of it's going to be very serious. If you have questions, just hold them to the end because I might answer them further on in the program, but they will, at the end we should have plenty of time for a Q&A. The way I want to kick this off is to bring you along vicariously on a space shuttle launch. So let's pretend we're all astronauts. We're going to fly into space. A couple hours before liftoff, we awake. Yeah, right. Good luck sleeping the night before a shuttle launch. They have a breakfast, which is more of a photo opportunity. Not many people have a big appetite before a shuttle launch. After breakfast, we get dressed in our pressure suits. About 3 hours or so before liftoff, we'll walk from the crew quarters, climb into the crew van, drive to the launch pad, take the elevator to the cockpit level, exit that, walk across the access arm. What do you think your heart rate is right there? I'll tell you, you're going to feel every beat in your throat. It's going to be choking you. In the white room, we dress in our harnesses, then we get down on our hands and knees and crawl into the cockpit. There'll be technicians inside to help lay us back into our chairs. They will strap us to those chairs, and then as they leave, they will close the side hatch, the access arm will be retracted, and we will be left alone. And while we're awaiting launch, we're going to be in the grips of 2 fundamental emotions, one of which is fear, gut fear. Fear for your life. I can't imagine, few astronauts will admit to that, but I guarantee if you crawl into their brain, when they're out there in that launch pad, we're fearing for our life. But at the same time that fear is on us, we're going to be boundlessly joyful. Because for most of us, it's a lifetime quest about to come true, a dream come true. And with that at hand, we'll be overwhelmed with joy. So it's strange, but it is simultaneously you have this gut fear and this boundless joy. After one of my programs, one of the mothers in the group came up, one of the mothers that was in the audience came up to me and said, that's exactly how she felt during labor, fear and joy. So all you moms out there have been closer to the astronaut experience than you previously thought. Okay, T-minus 6 seconds, the 3 liquid engines start. They're checked by computers, assuming they pass all those checks at T0. The hold down bolts blow. There's 4 explosive bolts holding each of the 2 solid boosters to the pad. Those explode apart. The solid boosters ignite, and now we're slapped into our seats with a force of about 2 times gravity as the rocket leaps off the launch pad. For the first 2 minutes, it's a very noisy, rocky ride. You're going through the thick part of the atmosphere. You have this interaction of shock waves, and then the boosters are roaring away next to you. But then 2 minutes and 12 seconds up, those boosters burn out and separate. And you're up at about 25 miles now, so you're above most of the atmosphere. So you hear this bang, you see a whip of fire across the windscreens as these things are explosively separated. And then like a light switch, it got dead quiet. No noise, no vibration, it was like an electric push into space. The only way you could tell you're moving after those boosters were gone, besides looking at the instruments where the G-force is slowly rising our body, and those will ultimately stabilize at 3 Gs, 3 times the force of gravity. But it was silent, just a silent push into space from that point on. 8.5 minutes up, the autopilot shut off the engines, the gas tank was empty, it was jettisoned to burn up in the atmosphere like a giant meteor. Whoops, let me back up. Yeah, I'll get it right yet here. It would burn up in the atmosphere like a giant meteor, and the only thing now headed to orbit is the winged vehicle. We call that the orbiter, and now we're on our way to the International Space Station, where we're going to have the great good fortune of rendezvousing with the true heroes of America's space program, Sandra Bullock, and George Clooney. They got up there before we did. Okay, just quick Earth views. A lot of people believe that we see the Earth like this, one of these old Apollo shots. So these folks are tens of thousands of miles from Earth, and so they had a view of the disk of the Earth, whereas on a shuttle mission, you're only a couple hundred miles up, so the Earth fills the window. It's hugely close. We can see its curve, but we cannot see it as a globe hanging out in space as the Apollo astronauts did. And of course, this is the Mideast right here with some. There's Cairo, Egypt, the Nile River, Red Sea, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Mediterranean Ocean, Sea there. Great view of the Mideast. But most of the time when you look out the window, you see water. The world's a water planet, and that's what you see most of the time. In fact, there's on some, depending how the orbit inclination, the orbit you're on, you could be going over the Gulf, over the Indian Ocean into the Pacific Ocean, and that's like a 45-minute passage. That's half 90-minute orbit. That's half your orbit is spin over ocean. So you don't see a lot of land when you're up there because the Earth doesn't have a lot of land. It's a water planet. A lot of it's ice. This is Greenland right here, which was clearly named by a real estate developer. The Aurora Borealis looks like green fire hanging in the sky. Beautiful to watch that. This is thunderstorms flashing away. This video is over the Gulf of Mexico looking north into the southeast part of the U.S. So here you see the lights of Tallahassee, Atlanta. There's Jacksonville, St. Pete, Tampa, and Orlando coming to view here as the camera pans down. Beautiful look at city lights and lightning. Anything at night was always gorgeous to look at. This is a video, I'll stop it here for a second. It plays at about probably, 4 times faster than it would appear from space in orbit. This was taken by a low light level camera, special low light level camera aboard the International Space Station. And it's of the shuttle now is looking down as it passes over the upper Midwest into Canada. So the lights that you see right there going into the bottom center are the lights of Kansas City. Coming up, you'll see the lights going in the bottom center, that's St. Louis. You see Chicago there, Detroit, Lake Erie, there's Toronto, Ottawa's up there, and I'll stop this thing. And there's Lake Michigan, Chicago, Lake Erie, Detroit, Cleveland, Columbus. Anybody's hometown? Anybody hometown there? Columbus? Okay. And Akron over there. Okay, space physiology, what happens to your body when you enter space? Well, if you have long hair, ladies, you're going to have a bad hair day in space. No doubt about that. There's a couple other things that happen, though, and one of them is space sickness. About half the astronauts get sick up there, nauseous, and end up vomiting or certainly feeling like they were seasick. It is not correlated to Earth motion sickness. The docs cannot figure out what causes this. It has no correlation whatsoever with your susceptibility to motion sickness here on Earth. And I'm a classic example of that. I flew in the back seat of fighters in the Air Force. I vomited countless times in the back of those things. I get seasick. I've never been on a cruise. I'm never going on a cruise. Kill me. I forget roller coasters. And hey, the only ride I took at Disney World was the Small World ride. That's the only one that I could qualify on. But I mean, seriously, I would call myself very prone to motion sickness here on Earth, but up in space, I didn't have any sickness. And then we had test pilots who have never been motion sick in their life on anything here on Earth will go up in space and vomit for a couple days or even feel bad for a couple weeks. So docs cannot figure out what causes it. So initially, they tried all these holistic things, trying to fix it. None of them worked, so they just finally went to industrial strength anti-nausea medication to inject in people when they get up there if they're feeling bad. To take care of that. And there's some other things that occur up there that could possibly be showstoppers for human flight long duration, one of which is associated with fluid shift. We have a lot of blood and fluid in our bodies. It's biased toward our bottom part of our bodies here on Earth. In weightlessness, all of that is equally distributed through your body. If you look at astronauts close when they're in orbit, you'll see their faces are kind of puffy and their eyes are kind of puffy. This is because of that migration of fluid throughout the body. And it causes a couple things to happen, one of which is your discs and your spine absorb that water and push the vertebrae apart, and you grow taller. I was 1.5 inches taller in space than I am now. The problem with that is your lower back muscles don't stretch right away to accommodate that longer spine, he'd get a terrific backache as a result. My longest mission was a week, and I had a terrific backache the whole time. And I've talked to people who've been in space for months, and they said it took about a month before they were able to finally feel those muscles that accommodated that longer spine. But that's just a minor problem, right? I mean, you deal with a backache for a couple of weeks and it goes away. But I just had a physical exam down at NASA, and I was talking to the ophthalmologist there, and he said they're seeing some potentially bad showstoppers with the effect on the eye of this fluid shift. It causes the eye to change shape. The eye absorbs fluid too, and it changes shape and puts stress or whatever it is on the optic nerve, and they're seeing indications that the optic nerve could be damaged permanently. It wouldn't come back when you get back to Earth. And so they're worried about that, and they're looking for more data as they continue with these space station operations. So, who knows whether that's going to be something they can fix and make sure it doesn't cause, real serious problems for astronauts when they get back. And obviously radiation is another issue that's going to have to be solved if you start sending people up there beyond the Van Allen belts, especially, or the magnetic field of the Earth, going to the moon, going to Mars, things like that. You're going to be more exposed to radiation, which obviously is bad for the human body. So those are some of the physiological effects that occur when you're up in space. Let's talk about living in space, space habitability. How do you sleep up there? Well, we have these sleep restraints. We pin to the walls, and you zip yourselves into them. The gentleman in the foreground is not asleep. He's holding his hands, because when you fall asleep, what you see in the background occurs. Your arms float out in front of your face. That is so weird to wake up in a sleep period. You look around and see people asleep with their arms floating out in front of them, look like they're in suspended animation. By the way, when you think about it, you can go to sleep in weightless anytime you want. Just close your eyes and go to sleep. There's only one position in weightlessness, and that is weightlessness. There's no laying down, standing up, sitting down. You can't drop anything, pour anything. Weightlessness is weightlessness, right? So just close your eyes and go to sleep. Problem with that is you will drift around and perhaps end up in an embarrassing embrace with a fellow crew member. So we have these we call them sleep restraints. They look like sleeping bags, but you're not laying in them. They just restrain you from drifting around in the cockpit. Okay, how do you eat? Here's peanut M&M baseball. There's a pitch, a high fly to left field. Two outfielders go running out for it and crash together. Your tax dollar at work. These are just playing around with food up there. Most of the food we carry up there on the shuttle, at any rate, was dehydrated, like REI camping food, basically dehydrated food, packaged a little different. They had this plastic covering and a machine that would pierce the plastic, inject water into it. This happens to be dehydrated strawberries. You just mix the water and the food together, you cut off the plastic, peel it back, and eat with a fork and spoon, just like you eat here on Earth. You gotta eat kind of slow up there, though, or you have food flying all over. Here's a burrito made with dehydrated eggs and dehydrated sausage patty. We tried taking bread to make sandwiches and stuff up in space, peanut butter and stuff like that, but bread crumbles too easy, so we went to tortillas. They weren't real good for making sandwiches and for, in this case, a burrito. How do you drink up there? Well, that's one way to try it right there. Yeah, it is fun to play around with fluids, although you see some fluids up there you wish you hadn't seen. But we carry, when you think about it, if I gave you a glass of water, Coke or whatever up there in space to drink, and you turn a glass, what's going to happen? Nothing. Weightlessness, everything's weightless, right? Nothing's going to pour. So you'll be looking at that Coke wondering how you're going to drink it. So we have these bags that have various powders in them, and you pierce the end to fill it with hot or cold water, depending on what the beverage is. And you have a selection of these things. And then you have to put a straw and suck from a straw. You have to suck from a straw to drink up in space. How about, well, this is again just a guy throwing peanut M&Ms into a ball of water. I find that fascinating, though, to see, a ball of water floating like that. I've told kids before, I said, can you imagine someday when they have space hotels and you park your rocket ship there and you float into the lobby and they have a gigantic ball of water that's being held in place by sound waves or whatever, that's being held in place by air, whatever. It's being held there in the middle of that lobby, and there's fish swimming around in it. Just an aquarium that's just floating. And if you know how fish are, they can swim to the surface and pop out, in which case you're going to have to grab it and stick it back in the water, because otherwise it'll be floundering around there. Got exercise. Here's a Marine doing his push-ups. Wow, one-arm push-ups. Check it out. No arm push-ups. When you're weightless, you cannot use gravity as a resistive force to exercise, so we had a bicycle ergometer on the shuttle that we could get our exercise. Now, I never flew on the space station. I left in 1990, the first piece after my third mission, and the first piece of the International Space Station wasn't launched until 8 years later, 1998. So I had no experience on the International Space Station, but I am told they have a very extensive gym, if you will, up there to make sure that they can exercise all the body, all the different muscular parts of our system there up in space. Toilet, how do you go to the toilet in space? Obviously that is a very big question. I hear that all the time. Our toilet has no water in it. Water's not going to flow in weightlessness, so we have to use air to collect waste. Basically, our toilet is a vacuum cleaner. Do not try this at home. Here's our urinal. It's Velcroed out of the way for launch in this photo, but it's basically a vacuum cleaner hose, and there's different shaped funnels that twist on the end of it for males and females to use. The urine is sucked down that hose, goes into a holding tank, and about every 3 days when the tank was full, we would dump the urine into space. And that was always spectacular to watch, because the urine would freeze into glitter ice crystals shimmering in the sun. It's magnificent to look at urine dumps, to watch the urine freeze out there in space. How do we collect solid waste? We have a small opening in the top of the toilet. Down at the bottom, there's a fan pulling air down, so right underneath you, air is coming in 360 degrees, going down, pulling the waste away from your body, down inside that big container. When you're done, you take that lever, you move it back, it slides a cover across the opening, and it traps the solid waste below. On the shuttle, solid waste was not dumped overboard, it was returned to Earth, and I'm sure everybody's glad to know we weren't dumping solid waste up there, because if we had dumped solid waste overboard on the shuttle, it would have given new meaning to wishing upon a falling star. You would want to be very selective of the falling stars you were wishing upon if we were dumping solid waste into space. I think now they have these unmanned cargo vessels that come up, and after the cargo vessels are unloaded, they've put all this stuff in there, like poop containers and other stuff they just burn up in the atmosphere on re-entry. These look like handles. They're not. They're thigh restraints. You pull these up against a spring force, you twist them in, the spring force clamps your thighs to keep you on the toilet seat, to keep you from floating off. You don't want to float off your toilet seat up in space. Okay, shaving's done with a electric razor. A mirror I'm looking at is just a shiny piece of aluminum. You wouldn't want to have glass up there. How do you brush your teeth? He's squirting water in his mouth to do that. We use a regular toothbrush and toothpaste, but there's no sink to spit the foam into, so we spit it into a tissue and throw the tissue away. How do you bathe up there? You don't. That's the worst thing about spaceflight. You can't take a shower or bath. All you can do is wet a washcloth and wipe your skin off, like you see me doing right there. How do you shampoo? With great difficulty if you happen to have long hair. My haircut works better on a spaceflight than hers. That's definitely a bad hair day right there. Okay. Now, it's a little serious here. I wanted to talk about the Challenger disaster. There's a couple lessons to be learned from that for anybody that might still be out there working, but it's interesting to see the background of this. But Challenger was a seminal moment in my life, because 4 of my astronaut classmates were killed on Challenger, including Judy Resnick, seen on the right there. She was the second American woman in space behind Sally Ride. And her and I flew together 17 months earlier on our first mission aboard the orbiter Discovery. So we were crewmates on that mission, and then sadly she perished on Challenger. Most people are totally oblivious to the fact there were 2 women on that mission. All they hear about is the New Hampshire school teacher, Krista McAuliffe. But Judy was also killed. Here she is in our space flight in-flight photo from my first mission. Here we are in an airlock there playing around. Here she is at a Christmas party over at my house, and here she is at a chili cook-off. And I just like to show these pictures. I mean, these are real people. They had lives, they had loved ones, and they were gone in an instant, and needlessly so, because of a failure of the team, basically a failure of the NASA team. And I'll explain that here. Challenger was a result of a failure of the right-hand solid rocket booster. These things are so gigantic. They're 150 feet long, 12 feet diameter, 1.3 million pounds. They were so big, they were made in Utah by Thiokol Corporation, but launched 2,000 miles away in Florida. You cannot transport an object that large as a single piece across North America. So these things are made in 4 propellant-filled pieces that were shipped separately by rail from the Thiokol plant down to the vertical assembly building at Cape Kennedy. There these segments are stacked on top of each other and bolted together to form twin towers of boosters. Now these boosters ignited, they burned at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit and at a pressure of about 1,000 psi. Steel boils at 5,000 degrees, so you had to ensure in the design that the steel of the booster was never touched by the fire that it contained. So it was insulating material that ran the inside length of these booster segments. Now, the propellant also served as an insulator during the burn because the vehicle was not it didn't burn as a skyrocket. It didn't burn from the end up. It was hollow in the middle and it burned from the center toward the walls. The igniter for a solid rocket booster was itself a small solid rocket at the very top of that 150-foot core, and when it ignited, it shot a flame down the inside core, igniting the entire inside propellant surface, and it began to burn from the center toward the walls. So for most of the burn, you have yards of propellant also keeping the fire from the wall of the booster, from the steel of the booster. Now, the obvious weak point in the design is where you bolted these segments together, because there you have a potential leak path for the gas to pass to the outside, melt the steel, and cause a catastrophe. Now, I'm not going to go into the engineering specifics of the joint design that was intended to prevent such leakage, other than to say it was based on a redundant flexible O-ring scheme. 2 flexible O-rings, 12 feet in diameter, set in grooves at the perimeter of each of these segment joints to form a redundant steel-to-steel pressure seal. For those of you unfamiliar with O-rings, you have them in your plumbing system at home to form a steel-to-steel pressure seal to prevent water leakage. Same principle as used on the solid rocket boosters to prevent hot gas leakage out those joints. On Challenger, both O-rings failed on the bottom segment of the right side solid rocket booster at ignition. Look in that yellow circled area, you see that black smoke? As the vaporized O-rings being shoved out that bottom joint, you now have 5,000 degrees eating into that outer wall. As the rocket flies higher, the gas is vaporizing a bigger and bigger hole in the side of the booster rocket. 73 seconds up, the rocket comes apart, killing 7 astronauts. Now, most people seeing this will immediately refer to it as an accident. Challenger was no accident. It's what's known in the literature as a predictable surprise. And I can say that because in this business, it didn't get any better than to get the piece back and see how it was performing. And that was the case with the solid rocket boosters. They were not throwaway items. After they were jettisoned, they had these gigantic parachutes that lowered these empty tubes into the water. Air would be trapped in them temporarily when they landed, so tugboats were out there to put a line on them, tow them back to shore. There they were cleaned up, taken apart, inspected, and used over again. Now, the operative word in this process is inspected. And on 12 of 24 missions before Challenger was number 25. On 12 of 24 missions before Challenger, beginning with the recovery of the boosters from the second flight, quality assurance and safety people at the contractor noted that these O-rings were suffering some very, very dangerous phenomena, burns. That was never expected. It was never seen in any of the ground tests. Their analysis said it was never going to happen. And yet, here on Flight 2, they see a burned O-ring. And that was a very serious anomaly, and as we moved close, and it repeated. It repeated another 12 times, another 11 times before Challenger. They saw various anomalies on this O-ring performance. And these engineers were growing gravely concerned about what they were seeing, and began to write, they didn't have emails back then, it was all memos, and began to write memos documenting their grave concerns about the performance of these O-rings. And I'm going to share with you an excerpt from a Thiokol engineer, Roger Bougielet. He wrote this 6 months before Challenger. He wrote a very prophetic sentence in this memo to his bosses. It is my very real fear if we do not take immediate action to solve the O-ring problem, we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight, a crew, and all the launch pad facilities. Mr. Bougielet's prediction was only off 73 seconds. He thought the rocket was going to blow up the launch pad, destroy the vehicle, kill the crew, and take out the launch pad facilities. He missed it by 73 seconds. So that's why you can say, hey, this was no accident. It was a predictable surprise. Now, what was the go-to source document? What was the origin of these concerns by the engineers? It was in a risk analysis document that had been prepared on this O-ring design. everybody that had any fingerprint on this shuttle in the form of hardware and software had to fill out a risk analysis document and answer the question, what will happen if this component fails? And based on the answer to that question, various levels of criticality were assigned to that particular component. And if the answer to the question was, if my component fails, there's no backup, it means death to the astronauts, loss of the vehicle, that got the highest criticality label, criticality 1. What you're seeing here is a risk analysis document for the O-ring design. So they labeled it rightfully criticality 1 because it represented a single failure point. There is no backup to those O-rings. They must form a seal. And everybody had to write it down. What's going to happen if that component fails? They wrote it down. Exactly what they saw in the skies all those years later with Challenger. Loss of the mission, vehicle, and crew. So it wasn't some vague hunch or feeling these engineers had. They well knew the dangers that a burned O-ring held for the mission and the crew. So the whole purpose of doing these risk analysis documents is to define red lines. Hey, we don't step across this red line. In this case, criticality 1, hey, you don't fly with the criticality 1 deviant. You need time to figure out what the problem is, come up with a fix, an analysis before you move on. So O-ring damage is intolerable, and the safety best practice would be flight suspension until the problem is addressed and fixed. That never occurs. For 24 years and 23 missions, 12 of which had these O-ring deviances, we go from the near miss on Flight 2 to the catastrophe of Flight 7, identical failure mode. And you have to ask yourself, how is that possible? How is it possible, particularly for this team right here? That's who we're talking about here. We're talking about the NASA Apollo team, the team that put humans on the moon. They did it 6 times. They returned those astronauts safely across 250,000 miles of space, the greatest engineering and safety accomplishment in the history of humanity. And yet that same team, many of the exact same individuals on that Apollo team, 13 years later wrote the script for Challenger. And that boggles the mind. How is that possible? Well, I'll tell you folks, when teams are under immense schedule pressure, strange things can happen in the team brain. And that was the situation that NASA was faced with. They were under tremendous launch schedule pressures to achieve a launch rate of 24 missions a year. That was the business model. The shuttle made no economic sense if it wasn't hitting that number pretty fast after the shuttle started flying. So here you have a team that's under, and you can see how this schedule pressure is playing out with the contractor. This is testimony given to the Rogers Commission after Challenger. Here's a testimony by a contractor. The problem was the increasing launch rate. We were just getting buried under all this stuff. The system was about to come down under its own weight. And then the House Committee on Challenger, what do they have to say after Challenger? NASA's drive to achieve a launch schedule of 24 flights per year created pressure throughout the agency that directly contributed to unsafe launch practices, launch operations. By the way, so you can see the effect of this immense schedule pressure on the team. And that happens on a lot of teams in a lot of different areas. It can happen to anybody. You think you're immune from it? No, nobody's immune from it. And you might ask yourself too at this point, how close do we get to that 24 per year launch rate? Not very. The most launches we ever had in a 12-month period were 11, and Challenger was the 11th. So we didn't, after 4 years, even reach halfway on that goal of flying 24 missions a year. So you have a team under intense schedule pressure. They're facing a threat to schedule. What do? Do what you said you were going to do. You go back to those risk analysis documents, invoke the best practices. What were the risk red lines? You don't step over them. You stop. In this case, it would have been flight suspension. Stop work. But that didn't happen. Too often what happens in these situations is that teams collectively succumb to that pressure and rationalize why it's okay to continue, to step across those red lines. And once they get away with it once, it became ever more easier to do it again and again and again until you find yourself facing a predictable surprise. It's easy to understand why people don't stop or may not stop at a risk red line, because the pain of doing so is real and immediate. Everybody knows, hey, the last thing you want to be is on that phone saying, hey, boss, we got a budget schedule problem here. We're going to take a big hit because we got to stop because we have XYZ problem in some industry. Doesn't matter. There's lots of them out there. But you know, that's real, immediate. Nobody wants to be, you know, it's going to be painful. Whereas the disaster is hypothetical. Maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe it won't happen. That's hypothetical. So you got that going on in your brains there. Too often teams fall victim to continuing accepting the deviance, and then once they get away with it, it becomes ever easier to do it again and again. That's called normalization of deviance, and it ends in these terrible, predictable surprises. So for NASA, they did some modifications to the assembly process, hoping to fix the problem. It did not. Damage, you know, they did some assembly process changes on the fly. We didn't suspend flights. O-ring damage continues to occur. O-ring damage never exceeds what they saw in Flight 2. And there's irony there, folks. The worst damage seen before Challenger was the first damage seen. All of the subsequent flights did not exceed what they saw in damaged O-rings from what they saw in Flight 2. And the engineers become confident. They understand that dynamics, that's what's causing the O-ring erosion. They conclude the damage will never be catastrophic. And so what happened? Over time, these 4 years marching toward Challenger, O-ring damage became expected. And that's not hyperbole, folks. Here's a contractor manager in 1984 recommended to a NASA manager to fly the 11th mission, accepting the possibility of some O-ring erosion due to hot gas impingement. I guarantee if you go back to that time, those engineers filled out that risk analysis document. You asked them at that point, what are you going to do if you see a burned O-ring? To a person, I'm certain they say, stop. That cannot occur. If we see it, we're going to stop. Absolutely, they would have been easy to say then because you're not under that schedule pressure. But again, strange things happen at collective team brains when you're under pressure. By the way, on my first flight, which was the 12th shuttle flight, the first flight of the Orbiter Discovery in 1984, no astronaut was aware of the O-ring problems, but after Challenger, we all went back to see the missions we had pre-Challenger, how our boosters fared. And when I went back and looked on ours, found out there was a very serious anomaly on our mission. The hot gases penetrated into the space between the primary and secondary O-ring. They had never seen that before. I don't think they saw it afterwards either. I believe it was the only time this occurred pre-Challenger. But what it was is that the hot gases got past the primary O-ring and was stopped in that space there by the secondary O-ring. And later on, in a book that was written after Challenger, an interview with one of the contractors said this should have been a very big red flag to have seen this. And well, it should have been, because if you go back and look at the basis of calling this thing a criticality 1 component was right here. Leakage of the primary O-ring seal is classified as a single point failure due to the possibility of loss of sealing at the secondary O-ring. Well, what did they just see on my first flight? They saw a loss of sealing at the primary O-ring. Exactly what they're saying here. That's why it's criticality 1. That could happen. Fortunately, the backup O-ring held pressure on my flight. So again, look, what was the recommendation? It was deemed an acceptable risk based on safety margin and experience base. That experience base became, people started looking back on the damage that occurred prior, and again, nothing was exceeding with the damage that they saw in Flight 2. So we went from O-ring damage is intolerable to O-ring damage can be expected. And so you start penetrating these red lines so often, eventually they crumble. There's no ceiling now to risk-taking. All future risk-taking after that occurs is based on what? Past risk-taking. And that is, sky's the limit. And that becomes this dangerous phenomenon called normalization of deviance. And I have a whole program that goes into this, but I just wanted to give you that little background there so you have some basis of understanding what happened with the Challenger tragedy. For those of you who are still out there in the trenches working, man, be ever vigilant to stepping across these risk red lines when you're under pressure, thinking it's going to be okay, because it starts that process of accepting ever greater deviances downstream. Okay, let me tell you what I did on my missions. My first mission, we had 3 of these spinning communication satellites we deployed. By the way, on my very first flight, remember I said these 3 liquid engines start, and they have 6 seconds when they're being checked by computers to make sure they're functioning properly before the solid rocket boosters are ignited. Because once those solid rocket boosters ignite, there's no going back. You're absolutely committed to flight at that point. On my mission, the 12th mission, all 11 missions prior to mine got down to T-minus 6, 5, 4, or T-minus 8, 7, 6, main engine start, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boosters ignited, rocket flew. Here we are out on my first launch attempt. We're getting down to those final seconds. 8, 7, 6, main engine start. I remember this heavy vibration in the cockpit, and I remember I was scared, I'll tell you. I remember thinking, well, whatever happens now, I'm going. 5, 4, 3, silence. One of the engines was sick. The computers did exactly what they were designed to do and shut off all 3 of the engines. That'll get your attention, by the way. We practiced for it, we prepared for it, but your mindset just isn't in that when you first feel that vibration. You really have a sense, oh yeah, I'm going now. Not so fast. But then what really got our attention was ground reported a fire at the base of the vehicle. Small fire. Well, let me tell you, when you're on 4 million pounds of propellant, there's no such thing as a small fire. And that really ratcheted up the fear factor in the cockpit. And for a while, we thought we were going to have to do an emergency escape. We did not have to do this, but for a while, we thought we were going to have to do this emergency escape, run out the side. There's nobody out of the launch pad in this situation to help you get out of the cockpit. So we practiced this. The access arm would be automatically rotated back to the hatch. We'd have to unstrap inside, go to that hatch, open it up, run out, and jump in these escape baskets that would then slide a quarter mile down on a wire. Let's see here. On a wire that would be, the basket would be trapped by a net down at the very end. Then we get out of that basket and hide in an underground bunker to wait out what the problem was. We did not have to do this, although we were getting ready to do it, because they turned on the fire suppression system, which deluged the launch pad, got the fire out, and we were extracted from the vehicle the normal way. It came back 2 months later to finally get airborne on this rocket on the first flight of Discovery, the 12 shuttle flight. Where's Discovery? It's in the Udvar Hazy Museum up there at Dulles Airport is where Discovery resides. My second flight was a second flight after Challenger. It was a flight on Atlantis. The vehicle Atlantis, STS-27, December 2nd, 1988. It was a secret military mission. We had a military payload. All I can say is I had a military payload. I was a robot arm operator. I used it to release this military satellite into space. Can't tell you what it is. It was not this. That's Hubble Space Telescope. I had nothing to do with Hubble Space Telescope. It's just representative of what I did using the robot arm to release a satellite. Close call on my second flight, the tip of the right side solid rocket booster during launch, it's an ablative material, broke off, structurally failed. It shotgunned our heat shield up on the nose area and the belly area on the right side. You see the debris from that hit right there. And this is an area that sees 2,300 degree heat on reentry. Our hit was on the right side, but obviously the vehicle's symmetrical. You need your heat shield intact to get through reentry, right? You have about 3,000 degree heat in the hottest parts of reentry. This is looking out the overhead window. When you're falling into the atmosphere 40 degrees nose high, that heat, that vaporized plasma, they call it, it's wrapping around the vehicle, and it combines into kind of a tornadic, tornadic shape streaming off into infinity above you. As you look out that overhead window, you just see that thing like a flag waving up there, stream off into infinity. So when we landed, all that white scarring there was heat shield damage. They had to change out, I think, over 700 heat tiles. They were so severely damaged on reentry. And this is what really scared us. And we saw this. We had the robot arm. The ground knew we had taken a hit. In fact, these are calls you don't like to get when you're up in space. Like, hey guys, did you see anything whiz by the window during launch? No, why did you ask? Well, anyway, they said they looked at the film and they knew we had taken a hit, so they sent me instructions to use the robot arm. It has a camera on the very end of it to survey the area that we knew we had been hit at. And we saw this tile that was completely missing, completely blasted free. And this is after landing. Now, there was only one of those squares missing, but they removed a big swath of them so they could see the damage and get to it. But you can see the underlying damage there. Just a couple more, probably seconds of reentry heating, and it would have burned through the fuselage. And I wouldn't be standing here if that would have happened. So very close call here on this mission. And I want to make a serious message, or leave a serious message here about this near miss. There is an obvious takeaway to this near miss. You got to fix the nose cone. You can't have nose cones breaking off the booster and shotgunning your heat shield. It's obvious, right? Well, there were some other takeaways here that weren't so obvious and were not addressed. What would happen if the debris had hit other parts of the heat shield instead of those silica tiles? Those silica tiles one could be completely gone, and the others around it obviously were able to protect you on reentry. I wouldn't want to try more than one missing though, given the damage that caused. But what about hitting other parts? For example, how about the carbon panels that see the 3,000 degree heat of reentry on the leading edge of the wing and the nose? Those are brittle carbon panels. They're not silica tiles. But I don't remember any curiosity being devoted to doing some tests to see what effect that debris would have had on hitting those carbon panels, and they came very close. Here's Atlantis and the hangar afterwards, right wing leading edge. You can see that damage to the leading edge right there, inboard. What would have happened if and that's pretty severe damage right there, that's silica tiles. What would have that hit back there on that outboard portion of the wing where it sees 3,000 degree heat? I don't remember any tests or curiosity devoted to that. And another one is, could there be other sources of debris threatening the heat shield? And we knew of one already, and that was foam falling off this insulation foam falling off the gas tank. But again, there was, these questions, the curiosity, again, it was the schedule pressure, turn the vehicle, let's fly, fly, fly. So these questions weren't asked, tests weren't done, and 17 years later, after our near miss, Columbia's loss burned up over East Texas. Why? Because foam off the gas tank struck the left leading edge wing of Columbia, and this is testing that was done on the ground after Columbia's loss, and you can see the effect of these impacts. In Columbia, they estimate the hole in its left leading edge wing was 9 inches, so you have 3,000 degree heat entering an aluminum vehicle, it melts at 1,000 degrees. So obviously that's going to end badly, which it did, and 7 more astronauts died. So this test here was 15 years too late. This is the type of thing you should have been doing after that near miss on Flight 27. And when you think about it too, the near miss on Flight 12, the temperatures were in the 80s. We launched in August, it was in the 80s. At that point, people should have been curious about the effect of temperatures on the ability of the O-rings to form a seal. Had that curiosity been there and some tests done, we might have avoided Challenger, because Challenger, the O-ring situation was aggravated by the very low temperatures on its launch morning. So the message here is both of these disasters were the result of mishandled near misses, both of them. And so capitalize on near misses. Again, I'm talking to people who might still be out there in the business. Be curious, be questioning. Don't just zero in on the obvious takeaway. Stand back and say, what else can we learn from this? Okay, STS-36 was my final mission, February 1990, another flight on Atlantis and another secret military mission. Well, let me tell you what we did. We rendezvoused with the aliens. Yeah. No. So I get this question a lot. Aliens, UFOs, did I see any? No. Did I rendezvous with any? No. We haven't done that. But what's my belief on aliens? Personally, I think there's going to be alien civilizations out there because of the enormity of the universe. When I see numbers like this, 10 billion trillion, maybe some of you astrophysicists in the audience have even better numbers than this. I understand this is kind of on the low end of what they think is the count of stars in the universe. But when I look at stuff like this, 10,000 stars for every grain of sand on Earth, that just, get your head around that. To me, it just says that there's going to be so many opportunities out there for intelligent life. I think there's going to be lots of intelligent life out there in the universe. But that said, I don't think it's come here to Earth. Certainly hasn't landed in Washington, D.C., I'll tell you that. But I don't think intelligent life has come to Earth. I really don't believe that. I think if it does, it will land and make a significant, unambiguous contact. I don't think they're going to go to trouble of flying these incredible distances, see the Earth teeming with life, and then only hover over lonely widow rancher ladies in New Mexico and beer-drinking Arkansas fishermen. That makes no sense to me. I think they're going to land and make a significant contact. Now, I know there have been some very credible sightings by military pilots, But I still think in this world of drones that that's what we're looking at. I think it's our balloons or other things that are out there. I just don't believe that alien life has visited us, because I think it would make a significant contact if it did. But this said, you can believe anything you want about aliens. Nobody has the answer to that. So if you think you've seen them or been kidnapped by them, I'm not going to say you haven't, okay? I have my belief. You can have your belief. I'm not going to argue. Okay, going back to Flight 27, we carried a football on that mission. Now, why did we have a football? Because our flight was landing in December of '88, and the Super Bowl in January of '89 between San Francisco and Cincinnati was being held in Super Bowl 23 was going to be in Miami, and the NFL wanted the halftime ceremony to be with all things associated with Florida, space program, those type of things. So we were there. We flew this football to present to Commissioner Pete Rozelle. We autographed it and presented it to them at halftime as part of that halftime ceremony. And here's a little interesting fact. Who sang the national anthem at Super Bowl 23? Billy Joel. Who was Billy Joel married to? Christy Brinkley. Who stood next to Christy Brinkley? The guy with two thumbs right here. Yeah, when I got back from meeting her, I called everybody in my Rolodex and said, guess who I met? Yeah, by the way, it wasn't too long after she met me that her marriage to Billy Joel ended. Just saying. Coincidence? Just saying. Okay, also present there was Annette Funicello. She and Frankie Avalon, there's a few gray beards here, know about this. They had those Disney movies that were a part of Florida, so they were there to put on a dance at halftime, reprising some of their moves in those Disney Beach movies. So we got to meet Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon. Actually, my wife and I, she's back there in the back, her and I had dinner that night with Annette Funicello and her husband. So I thought that was just bizarre, because I was in love with her as a teen. I had such a crush on her. Let's sing it now. M-I-C-K. Yeah, the Mickey Mouse Club. Oh my God, I had such a crush on her, and now she's sitting across from me. I was just, I don't know. It's kind of weird to see how that all came to close. But she's a very nice lady, and I got to meet Bo Derek on a beach in the Seychelles Islands. Myself and this other astronaut had been sent to talk to some employees that tracked the shuttles when they were coming over on the tracking site in the Seychelles Islands. And just by happenstance, she had to be there. She was on a vacation after the movie 10. She was there with her husband, John Derek, walking down the beach. Here's Bo Derek. She wasn't running in slow motion, though, with those braids, though. But when I got back, I called everybody in my Rolodex. Told them, guess who I met out there? I was like the Forrest Gump of astronauts. I would just end up in these serendipitous situations where there were these famous actresses around. I probably met some famous actors too, but I don't remember any of them. Met Jane Seymour. Yeah, the Forrest Gump of astronauts. Okay, here one of the messages that I preach to when I do a corporate programs, I talk about making sure people speak up or empowered, to make sure they count. And you guys will get a kick out of this. This is a lesson in counting. Why you want everybody on your teams empowered so they bring their best to the table. One of the real tragedies of Challenger was it had no escape system. The shuttle was designed to have no escape system, in the belief that it was as safe as an airliner. Airliners don't need ejection seats or pods, so the shuttle did not have that. No astronaut ever believed that. We all felt that was a serious deficiency, the fact that we were flying without no hope of escape for an in-atmosphere type of tragedy like Challenger. I mean, obviously, there's lots of places in flight, escape systems are never going to do you any good. In orbit, re-entry, things like that. But for an in-atmosphere type of launch failure, ejection seats, pods, something like that, we didn't have that, and it really bothered us. So after Challenger, obviously NASA got religion that the shuttle is not as safe as an airliner, and so they looked to provide an escape system. They looked at ejection seats or pods, those type of things, but in the end, oh, by the way, I'm getting ahead of myself. This was different from all the earlier manned rockets. Not having an escape system was different than the earlier rockets because they all had very robust escape systems in the form of these tractor rockets that pull the capsule away from a failing booster, a parachute would be deployed, and the crew would be lowered to safety. Again, we had nothing. So after Challenger, they went and looked at ways of providing us, now I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's see, I didn't know I had this in, okay. The tragedy of Challenger is that here's the intact cockpit being hurled out of that vapor ball. 6 weeks after the tragedy, the cockpit wreckage was pulled from 85 feet of water. And an examination of that wreckage, switches at multiple crew positions were found in emergency positions, clearly indicating the crew survived that breakup and died 2.5 minutes later when the cockpit hit the water. And the tragedy was they had no escape system. They were trapped. So NASA, after that, said, hey, we got to give these guys some kind of escape system. They looked at ejection seats, they looked at pods, things like this, but in the end, you can't retrofit a spacecraft for things like this. They have to be designed in from the get-go, so there was no way of giving us something viable like this. So in the end, they gave us the only thing they could give us, which turned out to be very primitive. We ended up with a backpack parachute, just like in Europe, just like bailing out of the B-17. Got to get out of your seat, go to the side hatch, jump out, just like over Europe in World War II. Yeah, good luck. So this system has some serious shortcomings, one of which, wind tunnel test proved, if you jump out that side hatch, you're going to strike the vehicle and you get killed. So the engineers were faced with how do you get the crew out of the cockpit and away from the wing and the fuselage in a bailout scenario. And so they brought a common life experience to the table that says you solve emergency cockpit egress problems pyrotechnically. You blast people out of cockpits with rockets and mortars. So here's how the experts were going to get us out of that cockpit and away from the wing if we had to bail out. This is a mock-up of the shuttle side hatch set on a sheer cliff at a test range in Utah. Okay, here's the engineers' answers to getting us out of that cockpit and away from the wing. They were going to mortar out a rocket motor. It would ignite and then jerk the crew member by the scruff of the collar out the side hatch. Yeah, you know, there weren't a lot of fans of this design. In fact, this looks like some old Wile E. Coyote ordered from Acme Rocket Company to catch that speedy roadrunner. Let's face it, this design is dangerous, it's impractical, but nobody could see a better way of doing it until at a meeting that was zeroing in on this design, somebody who would have never been expected to contribute to an engineering safety problem like this put his idea on the table. This guy was a flight surgeon, not an engineer, not an astronaut, but a flight surgeon, doctor. He suggested a telescoping pole that could slam down and out by springs after the hatch is jettisoned, put some rings on the pole, hooks on the crew's harnesses. They can attach to the, whoops, not a video of that. But anyway, that you could attach to the ring and slide down that pole and get underneath the wing. And that was the system that was ultimately adapted. It came from a flight surgeon. So a good lesson there is that you never know who has the best idea. That's why you want your team to be fully empowered to bring their best to the table. Okay, I'm going to conclude now. Take a little swallow here. With my life story, leave you some messages here that I think all of you can appreciate and pass on to the kids and grandkids. I was born 3 weeks after World War II ended, and my dad was a World War II aviator. I grew up in the very dark shadow of World War II, okay? I mean, I was a child of World War II in the sense that I was coming of age or getting older in the close into World War II. So my dad was a World War II aviator and regaled my brothers and I on his adventures in the war. Hollywood had a huge influence on me with these movies about the heroics of our airmen, and I wanted to be one of these guys. I wanted to be a jet plane fighter pilot and shoot down the enemy. No surprise, here I am with a big book of jet planes. I wanted to be a jet plane fighter pilot. Simultaneously, Hollywood was turning out these early science fiction movies on how astronauts would fly to the moon and these planets. And again, there's a huge influence on a young boy, 5, 6 years old, watching those Saturday matinees down in Albuquerque at the Chemo Theater. Everybody probably been there. Then I was 12 years old when Sputnik was launched. I was growing up here at this point, my dad was in Albuquerque. And so we're right on the edge of the desert up by the intersection of Candelaria and Wyoming. It was nothing to the mountain. So I could step outside. It was like being in a planetarium at night and could see these early satellites twinkling across the evening sky. So again, no surprise, I wanted to be one of these guys. I wanted to be a John Glenn or Alan Shepard and ride rocket ships into space. Albuquerque had a lot of open area for me to indulge my interest in homemade rocketry. Wasn't so much rocketry as pipe bombs with fins, maybe I'd blow myself to hell and back. Here's my 1960 sophomore year high school. I was at the old St. Pius X High School. This is my science fair project on how rockets might one day parachute back to Earth from space. I had to write a report for this project. Let's see. No, I'll get back to that in a minute. Here I am on the roof of my parents' house testing a parachute extraction system for my capsule. My capsule was a Maxwell House coffee can. My nose cone was a rolled up piece of acetate plastic masking taped into a pointy shape. Here's a test with the parachute coming out. The parachute was the plastic that covers the clothes from the dry cleaners. Here I am using my dad's car as a wind tunnel. If I saw this today, I'd dial 911. Notice the safe use of this step ladder right here. This is brainless teenager. Of course, that's redundant. Here I am setting up one of my creations. This is right dead center of the Northeast Heights right here. Here I am legging it out after lighting a fuse. This is called hazard mitigation teenager style. Here's ignition, and there's detonation. You know, people here, I flew 3 times in the shuttle, and in a minute here I'll talk about I was in Vietnam flying combat missions over there, and they think, wow, look at all that danger you live in your life. Trust me, the most dangerous period in any man's life isn't whatever we do as adult men. It's when we're teenage boys. When we're teenage boys, we don't have a brain in our skulls. Exhibit A, right there. Here's one of my successful launches. Here's one of my rockets parachuting back. Here I am recovering one of those rockets. This video loops. I want you to notice the young woman, probably about 18, 19 years old, walk off the screen to the right there. That is now my wife of 57 years, and she's back where you. Donna, stand up, take a bow there. Yeah, with that video, she'll never be able to say, I didn't know what I was getting into. Okay, going back to my science fair project, I had to write a report, and I want to share with you the first two sentences of this report. First sentence reads, today, I was writing this in 1960, this country and many others throughout the world are steadily working toward the conquest of space. Then I continued on my second sentence and wrote, someday I also plan to participate in this great undertaking. I was 14 years old when I wrote that sentence. 25 years later, at age 39, I'm flying on Discovery on my rookie shuttle mission, floating around in the cockpit as a rookie astronaut. Now that is a dream come true by any human's definition. And I know right now many of you are probably thinking, well, of course it happened to you, Mullane. You were different than me. You were born lavishly gifted. You had these incredible talents. You were a genius child. It was a piece of cake for you to become an astronaut. Well, let's see what destiny had to work with. This is my high school, senior high school entry, graduation, graduation yearbook entry. I wanted to attend the Air Force Academy. I couldn't get into the Air Force Academy. My SAT scores weren't remotely qualifying. They didn't even give me a second look. West Point took me, which frankly doesn't say a lot about West Point. But in all fairness to West Point, I was a third alternate for my congressional district. I barely made it into West Point, and at graduation at West Point, I wasn't on the stage getting awards for academic excellence. So destiny did not have genius to work with. Let me show you a few other things that destiny had to work with. This is the varsity club in my senior year at St. Pius X. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the star athletes. I'm not in that picture. You know, I was no star athlete. Destiny did not have athleticism to work with. This is the homecoming or prom. Doesn't matter. I never had a single date in high school. Fact, not a single date in high school. Student government? Yeah, right. Yeah, I never ran for student government. You're not going to see me in the yearbook on that. And this says it all about my high school days. The dedication pages out of my high school yearbook, senior yearbook. I have one dedication which reads, you missed Korea, but here's hoping you make Vietnam. That is the only dedication I have in my entire high school yearbook, senior year. So what does that say about popularity? Clearly, destiny didn't have popularity to work with. So it does beg the question, how in the world did this really unremarkable kid end up being an astronaut? Well, I can look back on it now in hindsight and see that I had a couple things going for me that proved very, very important in trying to become an astronaut. One is I had a narrow focus of interest, and that was on aviation and space. I had this total consuming interest in all things associated with space and airplanes, to the exclusion of the teen scene, of the bands and the music and the sports and the girls. Well, I was desperately wanted a girlfriend. I desperately wanted. And Annette Funicello refused to return my calls. But anyway, I was had this focus, and that was very important. I needed it because I didn't have this wealth of talents where I could try other things. It had to be one or nothing, and I was all focused on aviation and space. And I had an abundance of tenacity, and I know that was learned from my parents. My dad stayed in the Air Force after the war ended, and when we were stationed in Hawaii in 1955, he was crippled for life with polio, and never again walked, spent the rest of his life on crutches and braces and in a wheelchair. This time in my parents' lives, they had 6 kids to raise, 5 boys and 1 girl. And you can imagine, and all of us can imagine, the horror of waking up one morning realizing the primary breadwinner in a family of 6 kids is now confined to a wheelchair at a time in America, in 1955, where impaired people are not highly valued. So this could have gone down very ugly, but it didn't. My parents exhibited immense tenacity in pushing through the obstacles that polio, the immense obstacles that polio put in front of them to raise this family of 6 kids. And that was imprinted on me. I didn't know it at the time. But I was 10 years old when this was all going down, and I'm certain it was imprinted on me. This ability to push through incredible obstacles. So I have focus and tenacity. That's great, but it's useless if you don't believe in yourself, and I did not. I was seized in teenage angst. I was terrified of failure. I didn't try out. I was constantly diminishing myself by comparing myself to other boys. Oh, I can't try out for the baseball team or the basketball team. These guys are much better than me. I can't go ask a girl out for a date. I'm a dork, geek, nerd. No girl's going to go out with me. These other boys are going to go out with them, but not me. Just constantly diminishing myself, comparing myself to other teenage boys. So, hey, all the focus and tenacity in the world is useless if you don't believe in yourself. What changed for me? West Point. I owe a lot. I owe a lot to a lot of people, my parents, my spouse, and certainly West Point. Because at West Point, if you want a world of hurt to fall on you, say words like, I can't, I'll fail, it's too hard, I'm afraid. You'll only want to make that mistake one time because you're going to have a world of hurt fall on you. So West Point opened my eyes to the reality that I could compete, that I could do things I never thought I was capable of, that I could win, that I could beat other boys, other young men. And so when I was handed that diploma, I was handed an immense gift, and that was that belief in myself, that my boundaries are far, far beyond anything I previously imagined. So now with focus and tenacity, that is a powerful rocket fuel through life right there. Okay, at West Point, I met home for Christmas leave. I met this young woman back there, fell madly in lust, love came later, and got engaged through the mail because I couldn't get home to see Donna very often, and she couldn't see me at all. She had no money to fly up to West Point. So we got engaged through the mail. 9 months after graduation, a week after graduation, we got married. 9 months later, she gave birth to, by the way, this is strangers getting married right here. Because in that 2.5 years that we dated, I'll bet cumulatively we're maybe together 6 to 8 weeks or so. So this is definitely strangers getting married, and how it worked out, it's a miracle, is all I can say. Nine months after getting married, a week after graduation, she gave birth to boy-girl twin set. And I look at that picture of me right there, the thought bubble would be, can we put them back? But at any rate, Laura was born 3 years later. Some of you might know Laura. Stand up, Laura. Yeah, she grew up. Yeah, so here we are. This photo is 12 years old. I looked that up, 12 years old. We don't look like this anymore. We all wish we did. Anyway, flight training, I went into the Air Force. I took my commission in the Air Force. Went to West Point, but I took my commission in the Air Force. Went into flight training, wanting to be a pilot. test pilot. Maybe someday try to be an astronaut. Could not be a pilot. My eyesight was poor. So I flew in the back seat as a goose. Remember Top Gun, Maverick and Goose? I was a goose. Wasn't married to Meg Ryan, like Goose in the movie was, which, by the way, is her great loss, or so I like to believe. Went to Vietnam in 1969, flying in the back seat of the reconnaissance version of the Phantom. So our mission was to fly very low, very fast over enemy targets, photographing them for intelligence people. And there's our signature. We always low, so low that many times we captured the silhouette of the airplane as we flew over these enemy targets. After Vietnam, spent 4 years in Europe in the Cold War forces, graduate school, got a master's degree in aeronautical engineering. This is where I needed every bit of what I'd learned at West Point. It terrified me. The idea of doing a thesis, of getting a master's degree, terrified me. I came razor close to turning my back on going to graduate school. But I didn't, and that made all the difference the rest of my career. I would not be an astronaut had I not had that master's degree. Went to the backseater course at test pilot school, flight engineer course they call it. In 1976, I was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in Florida, flying weapons testing on various aircraft, and that's when NASA announced they were selecting astronauts for the shuttle program. To this point, I had no hope of being an astronaut because I wasn't a pilot. NASA did not hire gooses to be astronauts. They hired mavericks. And so I had no hope of being an astronaut until the shuttle program came on. And in that announcement, they said they have a new crew position called Mission Specialist Astronaut that did not require you to be a pilot. So I immediately applied and was fortunate enough to get selected in the first group of shuttle astronauts. It was these things right here that made me competitive. Didn't guarantee I'd be an astronaut, but it made me competitive. And like I said, I was blessed to get selected in the first group of shuttle astronauts. So the life lessons I'll leave you with, and you all know them, just a review for you, but pass them on to the kids. Do your best. It always counts. I did my best for 10 years, never thinking it was going to count toward being an astronaut because I wasn't a pilot, only to find out it all counted. So do your best, it always counts. Set lofty goals. Don't ever diminish yourself, comparing yourself to others. Be doggedly tenacious. Don't quit when you encounter the first speed bump when you're working toward a goal. Don't be afraid of failure. I like Michael Jordan's quote on that. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Here's a guy saying, hey, he failed his way into the NBA Hall of Fame. Every time he made a mistake in one game, he could apply that lesson to the next game, the next drive, the next pass, the next shot. You know, he failed his way into the NBA Hall of Fame. SpaceX has a great motto here. I'll show it here in a second on dealing with failure. We've all seen these recoveries of these boosters. They had one failure recently, but that didn't come easy. They cratered these things into a number of these drone barges out there. Yeah, that's going to leave a mark. But anyway, I love what, here's the way SpaceX works too. They say, fail fast, learn faster. I love that. Fail fast, learn faster. Advance your education at every opportunity. Advance your team and leadership skills. That's very highly valued. And then envision mission success. Some of these goals we can set for ourselves can be very intimidating when we imagine the years of work it'll take to get there. It's easy to then turn around and walk away. I do a lot of mountain climbing, still even in my advanced age, but it's a great metaphor for what I'm talking about here. When I'm down on a trail looking up on the top of one of these Colorado 14,000 foot peaks, and imagine getting to the top, it can be very deflating. But I just go into this Zen-like moment and try to think of not the pain of getting up there, but what it's going to feel like when I take that final step on the summit and it falls away, the horizon does, and I'm there. And it makes the journey a lot easier. And that's true with other goals. And metaphorically, a lot of peaks in life are a lot higher than this peak I'm standing on here. Like advancing our education. Again, that scared the dickens out of me. Seeking a promotion, starting a business, reconciling with people. These are all monstrously high peaks that could be out there metaphorically. And envisioning the completion of those are what makes it a lot easier to achieve them. And so the message is you don't have to be extraordinary to achieve extraordinary results. That's the final message. And I'll close with this. Geezers rule, folks. Geezers rule. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to Thank you. I'm going to briefly mention the books that I have out there in case somebody goes Googling me and sees these things. Riding Rockets is my memoir. This is R-rated. It is inappropriate for young children. Read it before you decide to pass it on to a grandkid or a kid, okay? It is R-rated, my opinion. And read it to the end to see my conversion from male sexist pig to enlightenment, okay? Because I was definitely a male sexist pig when I walked into the astronaut office, but I've transformed myself. Do your ears pop in space? G-rated, answers questions I've been asked as an astronaut, 500 of them. Lift Off an Astronaut's Dream is kind of a G-rated version of my life story. And The Father, Son, and the Holy Shuttle is my son's book. My son's a great author too, and my daughter's a great author back there too. So if you see any of those, you can get them on Amazon. Just thought I'd mention those. Okay, anybody have any questions about anything? Yes, sir.
In the 1940s and 50s, when I was a little kid, the plan to keep people like you from barfing into space was to be in
wheel.
dumbbells spinning
Yeah.
or merry-go-rounds.
Yeah.
Why was that plan abandoned?
Well, as I understand it, initially the whole concept of the spinning wheel in space, 2001, those type of things, is people envision that falling is terrifying, and if you're in this infinite fall of weightlessness, you're going to be terrified and not be able to handle it, so you better have artificial gravity. I've heard that as one reason why they were thinking of that. Obviously, weightlessness is not terrifying, you don't need it. The other reason, though, even if you wanted to build it, and the reason like the International Space Station doesn't want it, is the whole idea of being in space is to capitalize on weightlessness, to do things with metallurgy, with pharmaceuticals, things like that. They want absolute weightlessness, not an absolute vacuum. They don't want any gravity, basically, any artificial gravity. So that's why you don't see designs. Now maybe, if, for example, if it turns out there's showstoppers with like the deformation of your eye, some things like that due to fluid shift, maybe we aren't going to have to send people to the moon and Mars and be in space stations that are spinning. Maybe. I don't, that's ways off yet. Anybody have any other questions? By the way, anybody wants to leave, feel free to. It's not, you're not trapped here. I didn't want anybody to think they got to get home. Yes?
What's your thoughts about the Starliner saga that's played out for the last?
Yeah, I meant to preemptively answer that with a picture of that. I think that has been one of the most overhyped things that you could possibly imagine. I think they made the right decision with the, not bringing the crew back on it. They had an option of not doing that and could catch up later downstream. So yeah, I felt that they made the right decision. But I think this whole thing about being stranded. Well, everybody on a space station is stranded in the sense that they need a ride home. Those rides are attached there. They got Soyuz capsules, they got SpaceX capsules to get back. But it was so overhyped. I expected to see breaking news, pink chip on Starliner, they're gonna die! That type of thing. It was just so overhyped. I just was sick of it. So I think they made the right decision in bringing it back unmanned. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi. Did you suffer any long-term effects from your missions to space?
You'd never guess that I was 39, would you? No, long-term.
Like bone loss?
My longest mission was a week. I flew basically 2 5-day missions and one 6.5-day mission. So, yeah, my exposure to those type of things were, in fact, I should have put bone loss up here too for a physiological effect. But it didn't have that type of time and space where that would play out to be a problem. So as far as I know, other than the loss of my hair, I don't think there's been any long-term effects. They do track us though. Every year NASA pays for a very extensive medical check there at NASA for retired astronauts to follow the mortality of older astronauts and just see if they see any type of trends that might indicate that there's more cancers or something like that. But certainly I haven't experienced anything that I know Now, those people are up there for all those months, who knows? Maybe downstream find there's something there that wasn't good. Other questions? Let me, why don't you pick?
Okay, I think that's what you're here.
Okay. You pass that around, so,
So with all the space, debris, and junk up there,
yeah.
did you guys have to accommodate for that? And then what about the future? That if it's going to limit us in terms of all that stuff.
Yeah, that is an issue. We did not have to do any maneuvering around anything when I was up there. And obviously a space shuttle is maneuverable. An International Space Station is a little hard to maneuver, but they do it. Generally they have days ahead of time when NORAD sees something that's getting close. But clearly, it's going to become a problem. Already, I tell you, this book here, Do Yours Pop in Space, I was asked that question and I wrote that book, gosh, I'll bet 25 years ago. And in that, I answer that question and I just totally poo-poo the idea of a threat of a collision in space. I did at that time, there were like 10,000 things orbiting, and I said, hey, think about it, a sphere that's 200 miles up and a distribution of 10,000 things, which wouldn't be real because they're all different altitudes, but let's assume they're all the same. It worked out to, if you then scale it down to the state of New Mexico, imagine the state of New Mexico asphalted, you would have 2 cars randomly driving around. What's the chance, I think it was 2, what's the chances they would even see each other, much less run together? So I just thought there was 0 chance of a collision or a vanishingly remote site. Well, they had a French and a Russian satellite a decade or so ago, just randomly dead collision, destroyed both of them. The Golden BB. So it's definitely a real threat. And I don't know how they intend to, as we go forward, clean up. They're doing some early experiments. They're trying to, clean up there with some big net, grabbing satellites and getting them back out of there, junk. But I'm sure someday there's going to be an issue with it. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With these latest 2 astronauts on the space station, where their 7-day mission turned into a 7-month mission,
Right.
my wife and I got to wondering, is there any provision for cleaning clothes on the...
I was wondering the same thing. I'm sure these cargo vehicles are bringing up stuff for them, but I thought the same thing. They have to wear the same underwear for 8 months. Yeah.
Clean them at all?
I don't know on the International Space Station. I know they were experimenting with having some type of laundry capability on the International Space Station, but I doubt. I don't know. But they certainly could bring up stuff on these cargo vehicles that are going up there periodically. So I'm sure they got some of that stuff up there. But here's what I was thinking of. Suppose you had a child who was getting married and you had everything nailed down 3 months after you landed, and now you find you're not going to be there. Just think of all the turmoil that could happen with terrestrial plans if all of a sudden you're not coming back for 8 months. That could be a serious problem.
I know the wife would be really upset.
Yeah, no kidding, man. That might be Divorce City. You might as well stay up there. I changed the locks of the house. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering, I heard on the news today that the first civilian has walked in space today.
I thought they were going to wait a couple days to do that. They did. They opened the hatch and did that today?
I thought I heard that, but my thought is just, what is your thought, or are your thoughts on the civilian movement in
Well,
space?
that's inevitable. I mean, this goes back to the whole idea of having pioneers in anything is to pave the way for people that don't have to be, like gooses or mavericks. You can have the normal population. So that's what it was all about. So I don't have any problem. The only thing I have a problem is that anybody ever, I don't mind people calling themselves astronauts, but the astronaut pin of NASA that NASA has is copyrighted and very, very unique. And people who flew on the shuttle, for example, very proud of that, and never want to see that be handed out to people who are not career NASA astronauts flying on the shuttle. Not on the shuttle, but on NASA spacecraft. That just, hey, if you want to have your own astronaut pin or something like that. But I don't see any problem. I tell you though, I think that's a risky flight. I really do. That spacewalk. I thought they were going to wait though a couple days before they did it. They just launched last night, didn't they? Or, yeah.
It's supposed to be Thursday.
Thursday is space launch? Okay, yeah. But the whole idea, they don't have an airlock. So basically, they're gonna open up that hatch, and you better be able to get it closed, that's for sure. So, I don't know, it's a little dicey, I think. Did somebody have a microphone?
In all the years of your training being on, sitting on top of a rocket that could explode, being up in space with the duration that you were, have they gotten any better about providing you support system for the rig?
You mean for the spouses or the women astronauts are doing the same thing? They're flying.
Well, for the spouses, the ones that are left on Earth?
Yeah, interesting story there. People don't realize, what you're alluding to there is the immense stress on spouses when this business is going on. Give you an example. About a month before a shuttle launch, the spouses of the launching crew had to pick what they called an astronaut escort. In the military, it'd be called a casualty assistance officer. Everybody knew what that person was there for. That person they were picking was going to be standing with them on the roof of the launch control center down at Kennedy Space Center during the launch. And they are the person that is going to be there next to these spouses. In my case, it was always wives. And in this moment that their husbands died, my wife termed it selecting an escort into widowhood. Because she had to consciously think a month before an event, okay, now who do I want standing next to me the instant I'm made a widow? And that's one aspect of this business that shows the immense strain you're under for a spouse. And then before a shuttle launch, before any launch, I'm sure they still do it, about 24 hours before a launch, they have this deserted, or they have this crew quarters, they call it. The astronaut house. Let me back up here. Before the space program started, that was a retirement area down there. They had hundreds of retirement homes. Uncle Sam came in there, eminent domain, condemned the properties, tore them all down, kept one on the beach. It's called the astronaut
Beach house.
Beach house, thank you. I'm trying to remember the term. Astronaut beach house. And it's used for conferences and stuff, but the most sacred use of that is about 24 hours before launch, they bust the spouses out there and leave them there for a couple hours with their, in our case, it was husbands, and you say goodbye. You have a dinner and, have beer, share some things, but eventually everybody drifts out to that beach and walks down that beach and says goodbye, and we all know it could be the last goodbye you're ever going to say. And it was for 14 astronauts and 2 shuttle tragedies. It was the last goodbye. Everybody knows that. And it's a river of tears been shed out there on that sand. I'll guarantee that. It is the most emotional, heart-wrenching thing you do, because everybody knows this could be the last goodbye. And so it is. It's not like Hollywood makes out, folks. It is an immense torture for these spouses dealing with that. I tell you, I can't imagine the Columbia tragedy, burned up over East Texas. Here you have these spouses waiting at Edwards Air Force Base, or probably Kennedy Space Center, and waiting at Kennedy Space Center, and the astronauts escort there, and everybody's, hi, hey, coming back, what can go wrong? And so they had to walk out to them and says, they're not coming back. I can't imagine that. Doing it, or even, obviously the spouse hearing that, it's just, want to rip your heart out. So it's tough. It really is. That's an unknown out there that people just don't address, but it is a very, very tough thing for the spouses to have to live with that type of stress. And my poor wife, who thinks you're going to die if you miss an exit on the interstate, she does not handle stress real well. For her, I flew 3 times in space, but I had to strap into the rockets, go down the countdown. She had to be on the roof of that launch control center with that astronaut escort into widowhood next to her. Had to do that 9 times to see me launch 3 times. So it is it's brutal on the emotions, no question about it. Okay? Yeah. Question? Yes?
Yeah, I saw where you had all the astronauts at one small space sleeping. Is snoring a problem?
God, I don't remember whether everybody snored or not. I imagine it could be, yeah, I bet it could be, yeah. I think now on the space station, they have cubicles, that people sleep inside cubicles. They don't just hang out in the walls like we did, like bats in a cave. But I'm sure it could be a problem, yeah. I never slept well up there. I didn't want to sleep, actually. I forced myself to stay awake as much as I could because I thought I can sleep back on Earth. How many times can I be in space? So I had to put my nose on that glass and look out the window. Oh, next, who has the mic?
And then just one more after this.
Okay.
So I guess you weren't in space that much, so like what did you do for work when you weren't in space?
When you aren't in space, you're sitting in, well, when you land, you go into a mode of supporting somebody downstream who's training for a mission. Helping out by, sometimes they'll have a new change to a software package, so you'll go to a simulator and help validate the change, or maybe it's a change in a spacewalk procedure, and you go to the swimming pool and go and do that. You're helping the crews that are downstream, taking a little load off of them to validate things so they can focus on training for the actual specifics of their mission. You spend a lot of time in simulators. You spend a lot of time in meetings. Oh my God. Oh, geez, I sometimes thought it was infinite Groundhog Day. You go to a meeting, you think, I heard this last week in this meeting, the same thing. And then next week, I heard this 2 weeks ago in the same meeting, same place. It was just the meetings, there's another unglamorous part of the shuttle program, or the space program. Okay? She's got there you go.
What does reentry and launch feel like? What emotions do you experience?
Well, I mentioned the fear factor on launch and the joy. They're certainly there. It's probably a misplaced sense of the most dangerous parts of a shuttle mission. We tend to think it's launch because there's so much machinery that has to work. When you think about it, you have 4 million pounds of propellant being converted in a nearly 250,000 pound object to lift it up 200 miles and propel it at 5 miles a second in velocity. And it does it in 8.5 minutes, consuming 4 million pounds of propellant. That is a huge energy exchange, chemical to kinetic potential, I guess, energy. But that you just worry about turbo pumps flying apart. They're operating these hellish RPMs and temperatures. A turbine blade flying off and causing an engine explosion and fire. You just fear all that. You tend to think reentry is more benign, and it is in the sense that when it comes to strictly to the machinery, because on reentry you just fire two motors to slow down a couple hundred miles an hour, turn the shuttle forward, lift it up, and now the perigee is in the atmosphere enough that it's going to slow you down, and you don't worry about gravity failing, that's for sure. So it's not the same as on ascent where you worry about the machines failing. Now obviously the idea of saying, oh well, it's not a risk in reentry was proved faulty with Columbia burning up. There's always a risk in every aspect of spaceflight. So but certainly before Columbia, I think we all had a sense that the biggest threat to us was during launch. Orbit and re-entry, not so much. So I felt much more relaxed on re-entry than I ever did in launch.
Tell the story about being on the lower deck and then climbing up to the upper deck during what?
During re-entry?
Yeah.
I was
Well, 'cause you were
being
like-
stupid.
Yeah.
On my second mission, there's 4 seats upstairs, and where the windows are. You could have 4 more seats downstairs. But anybody beyond the 4, and I always flew with, the first mission we had 5, we had 5 on all of my missions, I think. Yeah, 5 on all of my missions. No, we had 6 on the first mission with Charlie Walker. But at any rate, so people have to sit downstairs, and there's no windows, there's no instruments. It's like being in an elevator and you have no idea what floor you're going to. It's just, I find that terrifying, frankly. And I did not like the times I had to sit downstairs because, we rotate around, nobody likes to sit downstairs, so sometimes you ride up top on going up, but then you have to sit coming down. So I certainly didn't like that. On my second mission for reentry, I hung around upstairs rather than go downstairs to strap in, figuring I'd just film the first part. Is this the story you're talking about?
Yeah.
I was going to film the first parts of the reentry, heating, looking out the overhead window, but the G-forces started building. It's only 2 Gs on reentry. It's not really, but after being in weightlessness, and then plus you're wearing about an 80-pound pressure suit, boots, helmets, parachute, and all that. So I got pinned to the floor upstairs by the G-forces before I could get down and get into my seat. That was dumb. That was stupid. I should not have done that. I regret having done it. But I did get some great views looking out the overhead window on reentry. I just lay there filming it. Yeah. Okay. You maybe one more question?
Okay, one more question.
How much debriefing, medical examination did you do immediately after?
Well, the debriefings usually were later. The medical, it depended on the experiments they had you undergoing, because a lot of times they had experiments that wanted you immediately to be doing something like you see in some cases they have people being carried by stretchers off the vehicle. People thought, oh my God, it must be really bad up there in space. No, they did not want people standing up until they could get them back into the lab, wired up for blood pressure and all that before they could stand up. So those were the type of protocols that you might have to go through. But they always, as soon as you got back, they always had docs looking you over immediately. In fact, the first person in the shuttle, after landing, when they bring that stairway up and have a little box up at the top, up against the hatch, the first person in was the flight surgeon to make sure everybody was well. I'll tell you, that had to have been bad too. That had been like walking into an old tennis shoe after you have six bodies that haven't been washed in a week or so. Oh, it had to have been grim. But anyway, he or she would walk in there and just kind of make sure you're not going to die here in the final moments. I saw people stand up and faint, because of the use, the body had grown accustomed to being weightlessness, and they stand up, crumple down to the floor. So that's really why the delay in getting off the vehicle was. Once we landed, they sent another astronaut crew out after the flight surgeon. Some other astronauts got in there to take over. So all we did was just try to do deep knee bends and kind of adjust to gravity before we walked down those stairs and fall head over heel, in national TV. So that's what that was all about. But it's going to depend on the medical experiments that have been done before you launch, and now they want the data of after being in space. What are the differences there? Those are all going to be different. They have all imaginable things that in the medical side that involve needles and all these things that you don't like. We had a joke that they had one called Space Lab, a module that went up there, was going to do all science. They had a lot of medical sciences going on that, and the joke was they needed 4 mission specialists on those missions. And the reason, somebody asked, well, why do they need so many? It says, well, you got the subject, then you have 2 guys holding the subject, and then you have a guy with a giant needle doing something bad to this guy. That's why you need 4 mission specialists on these biomedical type of missions. I think we're going to probably call it quits so everybody can head on home and see how the debate went. But anyway, I really enjoyed sharing the stories with you, and I wish you all the very, very best of luck. And by the way, I wear this, so I look somewhat like an astronaut. If anybody wants to get a photo or something with me, feel free to come on up here, and I'm happy to pose. Okay? Have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.